In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this ice cream drumstick. So we'll be modeling the waffle cone, and then we'll be sculpting the ice cream and the magic shell chocolate sauce. And then we'll be modeling some little roasted peanut chunks and placing it on the top of the ice cream. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished tutorial project files, you can get that with the links in the video description. And in the project files, you'll also get these 4 different customizable ice cream materials. So you'll get a chocolate sauce material, a smooth ice cream material, this procedural waffle cone material, and also the roasted peanuts material. Now in this video, I'm not going to show you how to create those 4 main procedural materials which we'll be adding to the ice cream, because I've just recently released a separate video where I show you how to create those procedural ice cream materials. So before you watch this tutorial, you should pause this video and go back and watch that tutorial and learn how to create the materials. Or if you'd like to just purchase the procedural materials so you can add them into this tutorial, then you can purchase those procedural materials with the links in the description. Now we are going to be sculpting the ice cream and the chocolate sauce, so if you can use a drawing tablet for the sculpting, then I'd highly recommend that you do that. I will also have some Amazon affiliate links in the description to some drawing tablets that I recommend, so if you purchase something through those links, I'll earn a small commission, but with no extra cost to you. And the drawing tablet that I'll be using in this video to sculpt the ice cream and the chocolate sauce is just going to be this little Wacom pad tablet. Now I'm also going to be downloading a few different textures online, so link will be in the description if you want to download them. So for the lighting of the scene, I'm going to be using this Autumn Forest 04. This is on polyhaven.com, and I'll just download the 1K HDR version. And at the end of the video, when we do the compositing, I'm going to be downloading this nice soft gradient background, and this is on Pixabay. So I just downloaded the highest quality image on Pixabay, so again, link is in the description. And then the other resource that you'll need to get is the 4 different procedural materials. So you can either watch the tutorial, which I just released, I'll have the link to that in the description, or if you'd like to purchase the procedural materials, you can get them with the links in the description, and then you can import them into this blend file. So in a new scene in Blender, I'm just going to delete everything, and let's start by modeling the waffle cone. So I'll go to the add menu, I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm going to add a cylinder. I'm going to scale the cylinder down to 0.2, so I'll type in 0.2 and enter so it's a better size, and then I'll press Ctrl A and just apply the object scale. Then I'll go into edit mode and I'll go to the face select. I'll just select this face here on the bottom, and I'll go to front view, and if you look closely here in Blender, you can see there's these grids. So I want to bring down the bottom face on the Z axis so it's 7.5 grids long. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5 grids long, just right there. Then I'm going to scale down the bottom face and I'll type 0.05, just 0.05 and hit enter. So now that's the shape of the cone. Now I'm going to go up here to the top face and I'll just select the top face and delete the faces. So I'm now going to add some loop cuts to add more geometry, because with the material it's going to be using displacements, and I'm also going to be adding a displacement modifier just to add a little bit of noise to the object to make it look more realistic. So I'll hit Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and then I can type 20, and then I can left click and then right click so the loop cuts stay where they are. So now you can see each one of these squares here, or each one of the faces, is about a square shape. Let's also go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to go to the vertex select, and I'll hold down the Alt key and select that bottom loop, and I'll hit Ctrl B to add a bevel, and just bring it out like that so there's a bevel on the bottom. Let's save our project, so I'll click on File and Save. And I'll just save this as Ice Cream Drumstick and click on Save Blender File, and then just hit Ctrl S as you're working on the project to save it. So I'm going to go back into edit mode on the waffle cone, and what I want to do is I want to kind of cut out a part on the waffle cone, because how waffle cones are made is they're actually cooked flat and then they are rotated and then connected together. So there's going to be kind of a cut here in the waffle cone. So if I hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, I'm now going to hold down the Alt key and I'm going to select this loop right there on that edge. Then I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to hit B for the box select, and I'll click and drag with my middle mouse wheel just to deselect those bottom ones there. So you can see we just have that top part of the loop. I'm now going to hit the V key. The V key is going to rip the faces. So now you can see it's separate, so I'll just kind of bring this out like that. And I can bring it over and kind of rotate it and just kind of bring it a little bit farther so it's kind of overlapping the other part. So now what I'll do is go here inside the waffle cone, and I'll hold down the Alt key and select the other side of the loop. Now you can see it selects both of them. So what I'll do is go into wireframe, hit B for the box select, and I'll click and drag with my middle mouse wheel just to deselect that part and deselect that part that part there, and also all the bottom. So we just have that inner loop selected. So let's go here inside, and I'm gonna hit G to grab and just bring it inside and kind of push it forward. Let's go right over here and kind of rotate it just a little bit. Just like that, so now you can see that it's overlapping a bit. So now what I wanna do is go back here to the front and deselect everything, and I just wanna select these vertices here on the front one, and I want to just make it look a little bit wobbly and a little bit random, because it's not gonna be perfectly flat, it won't be perfectly straight, it's kind of gonna wobble around a little bit because the edge isn't perfect. So I'm just going to select some of these vertices and just kind of move them around. So you can see if I select the entire thing, you can see it's just wobbling around just a little bit. Also, it looks like if I zoom in here, you can see that some of the faces are kind of overlapping. So let's select these vertices and kind of push them back a little bit so they're not overlapping. So I'll go back to object mode, and then I'm going to hit Control 4. So Control 4 is going to add a subdivision surface modifier with 4 levels, and let's turn the viewport and render both up to 4. And then I will use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. And I'm adding a lot of detail because we're going to be adding a displace modifier. So now let's click on add modifier, and we're going to search for displace. Let's click on new to add a new texture in the displacement, and I'm going to be adding a clouds texture, or it's like a procedural noise texture in Blender to make it look kind of bumpy. So let's click on this little button here. This is going to take us to the texturing panel, and then instead of image or movie, this is used to import an image texture. What I'm going to do is use clouds, which is like the same thing as Blender's procedural noise texture. And then I'll turn the scale down. Let's turn it to 8.1, and I'll turn the depth all the way up to 24, so it's really detailed. Now that's bumping out way too much. So if I click back over here to go to the modifiers, let's turn the displace texture strength down. So I'll turn it to like a 0.01. So now you can see we just have a nice subtle bump on the ice cream cone. Now if I go back into edit mode, I want to kind of zoom in here, and I want to hit Control R to add a loop cut, and I'm going to click and then drag this loop cut over and just stick it there so that that edge is a little bit sharper. Now you can see the waffle cone doesn't have any thickness right now, so we'll click on add modifier, and we're going to add the solidify modifier to make it thicker. And we're going to go down here to the solidify, and we're going to click on these dots, and we're going to drag it up to the very top. So it first adds the solidify, then it adds the subdivision surface, and then it adds the displacement. Now you can see it just looks a little bit thicker. And you can change the thickness of the solidify right here, but I'm just going to leave it as the default. I think the default size is a good thickness. Let's also hit Control R to add another loop cut, and I'll drag this loop cut up here to the top, just so the top of the waffle cone is a little bit more sharp there. Let's hit Control S to save. So let's now model the ice cream. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to go here to icosphere. Just add a new icosphere, and I'll click on the add icosphere settings right behind me, and I'm going to turn up the subdivisions up to 6, so it's pretty high resolution. Let's scale the icosphere down by a 0.2, and then I'll hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'll just zoom in here. I'll bring the ice cream up, and then I'll scale it up a little bit more. And then once you make it a size you like, just press Control A and apply the scale. We'll also use the object context menu and just shade it smooth. So with this object selected, we're going to click over here to go to the sculpting mode. So I'm going to click here on the display settings, and I'll drag this up so we can see them a bit better. I'm going to turn on the names as well. So I've now pulled out my drawing tablet. I'm just going to be using this simple Wacom tablet that I have for the sculpting. And if you don't have a drawing tablet and you're interested in purchasing a drawing tablet, I do have some Amazon affiliate links to some tablets I recommend. So if you purchase something through those links, I'll earn a small commission, but it won't cost you anything extra. So I'm going to click here to go to the clay strips brush. Then what I'm going to do is click here to turn on the Dyn Topo and click on OK, because this is going to add new geometry as we sculpt. And if I click on the Dyn Topo settings, I'll change the detail size to a 6. And then I'll hit the F key to make my brush a bit bigger, and I can just start to go along here and sculpt the ice cream. And definitely pull up some reference images of ice cream so you can kind of get the shapes right. So I'm going to start by kind of going around in circles and just adding kind of some lumpy areas to make the ice cream look a bit more natural. Now I'm not concerned about adding too much detail to the top because we're going to be adding another object, which is going to be the chocolate sauce over the top of the ice cream, but especially right down here where the waffle cone is, you're going to see some little like dribbles of ice cream kind of coming down. So I'm going to add some more detail right down here. Now what I'm also going to do is kind of go around here, go back and forth, and kind of add little bits of ice cream, which is kind of coming down. So it looks like the ice cream is melting down onto the cone a little bit. Let's hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view just to kind of see that from the front view. So I want to add like another bit here, but right here kind of on the very front, I want to keep on sculpting, kind of sculpt this part down so that there's a big dribble of ice cream. You can also hold down the shift key as you sculpt, and that is going to smooth out whatever you're sculpting. And then just continue to push down on the drawing tablet to add more clay right down there. And since we have the Dyn Topo on, it's just going to continue to add more geometry as we sculpt. You can also hit the G key to go to the grab brush, and you can make your radius bigger, and then you can just click and drag and kind of drag this down and just kind of shape the ice cream better. And I'll zoom in here and kind of add like another little lump. You can also hold down the control key and then sculpt in to kind of push away some of the clay. Let's go along there, just adding a bit more details like that. Add a few lumps here and there. And I'll go to the back here and just add a little bit more detail as well. And then once you've added some nice bumps along the ice cream, I'll just hold down the shift key, and we're just gonna lightly kind of smooth that out. All right, and that is gonna be it for my ice cream object. So I'll click back here to the layout just to go back to the default layout, and I'll hit Control S to save. So we're now gonna be modeling that magic shell chocolate sauce. So because we already have this object, which is pretty similar to the shape that I want, I'll just hit Shift D to duplicate and then hit the escape key, so we now have another object on top. Let's now make it a little bit thicker. So we're gonna click on Add Modifier, and we're gonna add the Displace modifier, and then we'll take the strength and we'll turn it way down. Let's start by turning it to 0, and then we can just drag it up by a small amount. You can hold down the Shift key as you're dragging the strength value to make your movements more sensitive, but I'm gonna turn it to a pretty small value. So I'm gonna turn the strength just to a 0.01. So you can see there it is, just kind of popping out the object. So it's a little bit bigger and a little bit thicker than the ice cream. And then I'll click on the drop down and apply the Displace modifier. Now I also want to be able to see this object separately from the ice cream. I don't want to get them both confused. So if I go here to the materials, let's click on new to add a new material. And we're just going to call this temp just for a temporary material, but this isn't going to be the main material. Let's scroll right down here to the viewport display. And for the color, I'm just going to make this kind of like a light brown, something like that, so that way we can tell the ice cream from the chocolate sauce apart. So now with this object selected, let's go back into sculpting, and you can see now it is a separate color. So if I just start to sculpt away here by holding down the control key, you can see there's the ice cream underneath, and then there's the chocolate sauce. Now for some reason you can't see the color change, you need to click right here on the shading, and you can see there is a color. So there's object, there's random and single, but make sure you change it to material so that you can see that material preview. So I'm now going to use my drawing tablet again, and I'm just going to sculpt away where I want to be able to see the ice cream. So I want to be able to see a bit of ice cream here and like a bit of ice cream over here. Now this is going to be like an ice cream drumstick, so this magic shell is going to cover most of the ice cream, but I thought it would be nice if a little bit of the ice cream is kind of dribbling down so you can see a little bit of the ice cream. So I'm just going to carve away some of that chocolate. Now what I want to do is kind of sculpt along here to add a little bit of a dribble of the sauce. So just sculpt along here, go down to the bottom, and just kind of sculpt along here to add a bit of a dribble. And I do want to add a lot more detail to the surface because you're mainly going to see this. You're not going to be able to see too much of the ice cream, but you're going to see a lot more of the sauce. So I'm going to sculpt along here and kind of make a big spot coming out. I'm using the clay strips brush for this. Pop a little area coming out here and maybe another area right here, and just make it a little bit more lumpy. And I forgot to turn on the Dyn Topo, so it adds more geometry. So I'll turn on the Dyn Topo, click on OK, and make sure the detail is set to a 6. I might even turn it down a little bit to like a 4 so it has a bit more detail. Now if you look at reference images of an ice cream drumstick, usually the chocolate sauce kind of lumps over and there's kind of some little areas with creases and then some other more bumpy areas. So I'm going to go back and forth here with the clay strips brush and just kind of add like some bumps here, adding another little bump there. And then what you can do is you can go to the crease polish and you can go along here and just kind of crease that in just to add some more creases. I find that definitely makes it look more realistic. So I'm going to be adding a few creases here and there. Hold down the shift key, kind of smooth that out. You can also hold down the control key as you're sculpting to kind of pinch it instead of creasing it. So I might just pinch a few of these areas, kind of pinch that. Also like pinch this here to make that edge just a little bit thicker. And then also just kind of sculpt that in and then hold down the shift key and lightly smooth out that area because I want that to be quite a bit smoother. You can also use the crease sharp. This one is a lot sharper. You can hold down the control key if you want to add like some really sharp creases and then smooth it out, or you can just sculpt in there and then smooth that out. Before I continue to add those really sharp details, I want to go back here to the clay strips brush and I just want to add a few more big bumps here just to add some larger details, because when you're sculpting, it's best to add the bigger shapes first and then add the small details on top afterwards, after you have the main shape. So you can kind of see I'm making a big lump there, kind of a big lump there that kind of comes up. So you can see adding all that detail really makes it look a lot more realistic. All right, so I've sculpted kind of the main details of the ice cream. I'm also going to hit the G key again for the grab brush, and I'm just going to pull the entire thing up a little bit because it seems just a little bit more flat, or a little bit too flat. So I'm going to pop that out there. And then I do also want to see a bit more of the ice cream. So what I'm going to do is hover my mouse over the ice cream, and I'm going to hit Alt Q. So Alt Q is going to go into sculpt mode of this object, and now I can just use the grab brush and kind of pop some of that ice cream down, just kind of pull it down and flatten it just a little bit so you can see a bit more of the ice cream. Hit Alt Q again with our mouse hovered over the chocolate sauce. So now what I want to do is go here to the crease sharp brush, or you can use the crease polish brush, and I'm going to hold down the control key and kind of pop out some areas, and then hold down the shift key and lightly smooth it out just to add a bit more details. Also, I need to turn back on the Dyn Topo to add geometry as I sculpt. So just kind of sharpening up a few areas, kind of sharpening this up here, kind of adding a little sharp area there, maybe sharpening that up. All right, so that is going to be it for the sculpting of the chocolate sauce. So I'll go back here to the layout. And what I now want to do is add two little dribble objects. To do this, let's go to the add menu. We're going to add a cube. I'll go into edit mode and I'm going to scale the cube way down. And then back in object mode, I'll bring the cube down here. Let's rotate it and stick it in here. And then in edit mode, I'll scale it down again and scale it up on the Z axis and kind of rotate that over like that. Then I'll hit Control R and I'll just scroll my mouse wheel till there's a few loop cuts and place the loop cuts there. And then back in object mode, I'll hit Control 3 to add a subdivision surface. And let's click on the drop down here and apply the subsurf. Let's hit Control A and we're going to apply the rotation and scale. And then what we can do is go back here to sculpting. Let's zoom in here. We can just sculpt this object. So we'll turn on the Dyn Topo again, so check mark that, click on OK. And what I'm first going to do is hit the G key for the grab brush, and I'm going to kind of pull this part out and kind of pull this down, just kind of pull it around so it looks a little bit more random. It's going to be kind of thinner as it gets to the bottom. And then right up here, maybe it can be a little bit thicker. And then let's go to the clay strips brush, and we can add more geometry. You can also hold down the control key to kind of push in the clay to flatten it, and then hold down the shift key to smooth it. And let's make it quite a bit more random, so kind of carve in a spot here, maybe go here to this side and kind of pop out an area just to make it a bit more of a random shape. And I'll hold down the control key and kind of push that in a little bit so it's not popping out too much, and then just smooth out any areas which need to be smooth. All right, I'm going to call that done. So let's just click back here to the layout, and I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth. And then I'll duplicate this piece and let's rotate it. You can double tap the R key to use the trackball rotation. And I'm just going to stick another piece right here and just kind of stick it inside the waffle cone like that. So let's now go back into sculpt mode, and then we'll navigate over here. And for this one, I'm just going to make it a smaller one. And this one is going to be kind of like a raindrop shape. So I'll hold down the control key and kind of push that in there so you can't see all of it. And then right here, I'll kind of thicken that up down there. And then right here, kind of hold down the control key and push it in so it's more of like a raindrop shape. So it's going to be thinner up here. And then as it goes down, it'll get nice and thick and then get thinner up to the top. And once you're finished, we can just go back here to the layout and we'll just save the project again. So let's now set up the lighting, and then we'll be adding the materials. So I'll click right over here to go to the world properties. I'll click on the yellow dot next to color, and we'll choose environment texture, and I'll be opening up that HDRI. And here's the Autumn Forest 04 HDRI from polyhaven.com. Again, link is in the description if you haven't downloaded it. So I'll just open the image and we'll go into the rendered viewport mode. And I'm going to be using Cycles Render because I'm going for realism. You could use Eevee if you want to, but I'll be using Cycles. Let's also click here on the render properties. We'll go to the film tab and we're going to check mark the transparent button. And then we'll also go here to the color management, and I'm going to be using AGX as the view transform, and I'll turn the look to high contrast. So let's now add some lights. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll go down here to light, and I'm going to add an area light, and then I'll rotate the area light back and move it over here. And what I want to do is make the light track to this object. So I'll go over here to the constraints. I'll click on add object constraint and I'll add a track to, and then I'll click on the eyedropper and I'm just going to choose the cone object. So now I can move this around and it's going to track to the ice cream cone. So let's just move it over here to the side. We're going to add like a rim light. We'll go here to the object data properties, and here on the power, I'm I'm going to turn this up to like 100, and I'll make sure the color is fully white. And then also I'll click on square, and I'll change this to rectangle, and then I'll drag the Y size up and maybe scale the whole thing down a little bit so it's a nice rim light there on the edge. And then I'll duplicate this light and bring this light over here, and this one I'll turn the power down maybe just to like a 50 so it's a little bit darker. And I'll move this one a little bit more forward, kind of like that. So you have kind of a nice rim light on either side, but this one's a bit brighter and that one's a bit softer. And then I will select this light again, we'll duplicate one more and bring this one over here. And this one I'm going to change the shape to disc so it is circular, kind of scale it up. And you can see it does look a bit blown out right now, but that's because the materials are white, but we'll be importing some materials and it'll look better. So I'm just going to leave it at 100 and kind of stick that right there, maybe scale that up. Let's also add a camera. So if I go to the add menu, we'll go to camera and I'll move my view kind of to about here, slightly looking down, and then I'll hit Control Alt Numpad 0. Control Alt Numpad 0 will bring the camera to our view, and you can hit G to grab, kind of move the camera around. Let's go here to the output properties, and on the resolution X and Y, I'm going to turn these both to 1920. So 1920 by 1920, and I'll turn the percentage to 200 so it's double the resolution, so we get a nice high quality image. And then just kind of move the camera around. I'll also hit G and then double tap the Z key to drag the camera out a little bit. Now also if I click here to go to the object data properties, I'm going to turn the focal length of the camera up to 80 just to kind of zoom it in a little bit so it looks a bit more flat. And I like how that looks a little bit better. So I'm now going to be importing these 4 procedural ice cream materials. Now, if you don't have these materials yet, you can purchase them on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the video description, and then you can import them into this project, and purchasing them is also a great way to help support this channel. Or if you'd like to learn how to create the materials yourself, then you can watch the tutorial. I'll have a link to that in the description, and you can create these 4 procedural materials. So I'll click on File, and I will click on Append. And I'm just going to locate to the Blender file where I have the procedural materials. I'll go inside this folder, and then I'll go inside the material folder. So right here, material. So I'm now going to click and drag to select the 4 materials, the chocolate sauce, the roasted peanuts, the ice cream, and the waffle cone, and I'll click on Append. So now what we can do is we can select each object, we'll click here to the materials, and we can just add the material. So for this one here, we're going to click on the drop down, and we're going to add the chocolate sauce. So I'll hit the H key to hide that object. We'll select this one here. This one is going to have the smooth ice cream. I can hide that one. And this one here, this is going to have the waffle cone. I'll hide that object. And this one here, this is going to have the chocolate sauce, and as well as this dribble, the chocolate sauce. So let's hit Alt H to bring back all the objects. So now what I want to do is UV unwrap the waffle cone because I definitely want to change how that's looking. So let's click over here to go to the UV editing workspace. I'll zoom in here. Let's go into the rendered view, and I'm going to select everything, and then I'll hit U, and we're going to unwrap, and I'll just do the unwrap angle based. So I want to select everything here in the UV editor, and I'll scale it up a bit. You might also want to go down here into the material preview. That might be a little bit easier to see how it's looking. And then I can rotate this. Let's rotate that over like this. I'm actually going to go back into the rendered view to kind of see how that's looking. And then I can just kind of rotate it and scale it so it fits the size of the waffle cone. So I'll go back to the layout. Let's see how that's looking. And I'll save the project again. And if you go over to the shading workspace, you can edit the material if you want to, because in the previous tutorial, or if you purchase the material, this material is joined into a custom node group. So if you want to change anything, like maybe the displacement scale, if you want to turn it up a little bit, you could turn that up a little bit and make it a little bit more bumpy. You could also add like more bump strength on the noise if you want to, but I pretty much already set up this material to the customization that I like. So now we're going to be creating those chunks of peanuts. So let's go back here to the layout. I'll go into solid view, and I'll just select everything and hit H to hide everything. So now what I'll do is hit Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm going to add a cube. I'll go into edit mode, and I'm just going to scale the cube down so it's quite a bit smaller, maybe like that. So I'll go into edit mode of the cube, and I'll select the cube, and I'll hit Control E, and I'll click on subdivide, and I'll do that twice, 3 times, and then 4 times. So subdivide it 4 times. So what I'm now going to be doing is using the cell fracture add-on, which is a built-in Blender add-on, and we're going to cut out those chunks of the peanuts. So let's click on edit, we'll go to the preferences, and then go here to get extensions, and we're going to search for cell fracture, and just make sure that you have the cell fracture turned on. So I'll close the user preferences. What I'm now going to do is click on object, and we're going to go down here to quick effects, and we can add the cell fracture. And I'm going to leave all the settings at the default, and then I'll click on OK. So because we subdivided it, you can see it's adding all those little cracks there. So I can now select the large cube and move it here, and we'll just delete it. And then what I want to do is I want to select 10 of these chunky pieces. So just find 10 pieces which look pretty good. This piece is a bit too big, so I'm not going to use that. But this piece is pretty good, so I'll bring this over here. This piece here, it's like really long and stretched, so I don't really want to use that. All right, so once you've selected the 10 pieces, you can go to wireframe, select the other pieces, and we can just delete them. I'll go to top view, and then I'm going to kind of select each one of these pieces, and I'm just going to move them here, just kind of straighten them out so they're all straight and next to each other. And some of these pieces which are a little bit smaller, I think I'll scale them up a little bit so the size isn't quite as different. So all of them are roughly the same size, but I do want to have a little bit of variation, so some bigger and some smaller. So we'll select all these and move them here into the center. Also, I'll go to front view, and I'm just going to select them and kind of move them down here into the center just to organize them better. So I'm now going to select all of the chopped peanuts, and I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to type in 0.1. So just type in 0.1 so it's a much better size. And we'll bring this down here. Let's actually bring it up, kind of up here. And then we'll press Ctrl A, and we're going to apply the rotation and scale. So if I hit Alt H to bring back the other objects, you can maybe just bring this down here like that. And then with all the peanut objects selected, we're going to hit the M key. We'll click on New Collection, and I can just call this Peanuts, and then click on Create. So now they're in their own collection, and we'll be using geometry nodes to distribute them on the top of the ice cream. But first I need to kind of smooth them out a bit because they're a little bit sharp, and then I also need to add the material. First, let's add the material. So if I just select one of these objects, we'll click on the drop down, and I'll add the roasted peanuts. Then what I'll do is hold down the Shift key and select every other object. And then lastly, shift select the object which has the peanuts material. I'm now going to hit Ctrl L, and I'm going to click on link materials. So if I go into a rendered view, you can see they all have the same material. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to select all of them again, and I'll go into edit mode. Now you can see these objects have these sharp edges here where they're marked sharp, and you can see the sharp edges are blue. But I want to remove that because I'm going to be adding a subdivision surface modifier to kind of smooth them out so they look more realistic. But if I press Ctrl 1 to add a subdivision surface modifier, you can see these edges are still unrealistically sharp. So I'll hit Ctrl Z to undo that. So back in edit mode with all of them, I'm going to hit Ctrl E, and then I'm going to go way down here, and I'm going to click on clear sharp. So I'll go back to object mode, and I'll deselect everything. And if I just select one of them, I will press Ctrl 1 to add a subdivision surface with one level. Now you can see the render levels is set to 2, so I'm going to turn it back to 1 because we don't need it to render at 2 levels. We can just do 1. So now what I'll do is hold down the Shift key and select every other chopped peanut. And then lastly, I'll select the one with the modifier. And then I'll press Ctrl L, and I'm going to click on copy modifiers. So now you can see they all have the same modifier. And then I will shade the object smooth. Now there's still a problem. You can see even though I went into edit mode and got rid of those sharp seams, you can see that they're still sharp on some of these edges. That's because I need to go into edit mode for all of them and select all of them. And I'm going to hit M, and I need to merge by distance because there was some extra vertices which were overlapping. So now it looks nice and smooth. The problem though is that now those flat edges look like they're kind of being pulled and stretched because of the subsurf modifier, and I do want to have those flat faces be a bit sharp to look like the peanuts have been chopped by a kitchen knife. So what I'm going to do is go to the face select, and I'm going to select each one of the faces which is the flat one. So that one there, that one there, that one there. Just find the biggest face, so that one there, and then that one. So select all the faces which are the largest flat faces. So I'm now going to hit the I key to inset the faces, but the problem is that if I inset this, you can see there are some which are kind of overlapping, and that's being a problem. So I'll hit Ctrl Z to undo that. So I'll hit the I key, and then just click to place that right there. Then what I'm going to do is click right here on the transform pivot point, and I'll change it to individual origins. And I'll scale the individual origins in, so you can see by individual origins, it's going to scale each object down, or it's going to scale each face down by the center of the face. Then I'll hit the I key again, just click there, and then hit S to scale and scale it down one more time. So now you can see that each one of the peanut chunks does have a sharp area, does have a sharp face, but it is much more smooth on the edges. So we can now change the transform pivot point back to median point. So now we can use geometry nodes to put the peanuts here on the top of the ice cream. So we'll select the chocolate sauce, and we're going to click here to go to the geometry nodes editor. Let's go into the rendered viewport mode and kind of zoom in here to see how this is looking. Let's click on new to add new geometry nodes, and I can just call this peanuts. So we need to add 2 main geometry nodes to place the peanuts on the faces. So if we go to the add menu, we need to search for the distribute points on faces, and then we also need to search for the instance on points node. So we'll drop this here. So let's go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for collection info. So we'll drop the collection info here, and we can put the instance into the instance. Now still nothing is showing up, and that's because we need to click on the collection, and we need to choose the peanuts. So now the peanuts collection are being instanced there on the object. You can see they're all being added, but they're kind of straight, like in a line, like how I've set it up. So to fix this, we need to click on separate children, reset children, and pick instance. And now you can see we just have random peanut chunks there on the object. Now you can see that it actually has been disappeared and we can only see the ice cream. That is because we need to join the original geometry back here at the end of the node setup. So I'm going to search for the join geometry node, and we'll put it here after the instance on points, and the geometry can go into the geometry of the join geometry. So let's just drag these down here, and maybe I'll put the collection info right down here. So I want to change the scale and the amount of peanuts and the rotation. So what I first want to do is take the random here, and we're going to change it to Poisson disk instead. This will give us a distance min value, so I can turn up the density max, and you can see some of them are overlapping, but now if I turn up the distance min, that's going to add a minimum distance in between each peanut chunk. So I'm going to turn the distance min to a 0.006, and then here on the density max, I'm going to turn this up pretty high. Let's try a 9,000. Now that's a lot right now, but those peanut chunks are way too big. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the random value node. Let's drop this down here. And the random value is going to go into the scale to add random scale values. So we'll put the value into the scale, and now we have a maximum and a minimum value to randomize the scale. So for now, I'm going to turn the minimum value to a 0.2. So some of the chopped peanuts are a bit smaller, and then the maximum will be a 0.5. Now it still looks like there's a lot of them, but we're going to be weight painting where we want the peanuts to be, so there will be less of them. But we can of course change the density max down. We can turn that down if there are too many. Let me just turn the density max down a little bit, maybe to like a 7,000, so there aren't quite as many. And then you can see they're also all have the same rotation, so that looks really weird. It doesn't look very natural. So I'm going to duplicate the random value and stick it here, and we're going to take the float and we're going to turn it to vector instead. So this way we have 3 different values for the X, Y, and Z axis. So we'll put the value here into the rotation, and this will give each one random rotation values. Now to give it fully rotation values, so it's rotating around by 360 degrees, I'm going to keep the minimum at 0, but then here on the maximum for each one of these values, I'm going to type in TAU for tau. And that's a math equation which will create this number, which will make sure it rotates all the way around by 360 degrees. And there still is a little bit too many peanuts, and they're kind of overlapping a bit. So if I go back to this distance min, I'm going to turn this up maybe just to like a 0.01. That looks a little bit better. So now I want to weight paint where the peanuts are going to be because I don't want them all over the place. I just want them here and there, and also not as many on the bottom. So I'll select the object, and we're going to click here to go back to the layout, and then we'll click on object mode, and we're going to change this to weight painting. So now I can just click and drag here and paint, and wherever it's red, that's where the peanuts are going to show up. Now they're not really showing up right now. It's not really affecting where the peanuts are. So if we go back here to geometry nodes, what we're going to do is take this density factor, and we're going to put the density factor into the extra socket on the group input. Then we can go here to the side panel, and you can see we have the density factor, but I'm going to click on this button, which is the input attribute toggle, and this way I can choose the weight painting. So now if I click here, I can change it to the point group, and actually I do want to rename this, so let's click here on the group. I'm going to double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to peanuts. So now if I click on the density factor, let's change it to the point peanuts. So now if I just paint along here, we can just add the peanuts wherever we want. So let's go back here to the layout. I'll hit the F key to make my brush bigger, and I'm going to start by going along here and pretty much adding peanuts all to the top here, and then we can start to erase some peanuts away. But I first want to add the peanuts all over. So now what I can do is turn my brush strength down, turn the strength down, and I can hold down the control key and just kind of tap along here to kind of get rid of some areas. So if I don't like where some peanuts are, or if there's too many, I can just get rid of some. I can also just add a few patchy areas where there's less peanuts to make it look a bit more random and natural. Like right down here, I really don't want very many down here. It doesn't really make sense that they would stick down there. Most likely they'd be on the top. So I'm just going to go along here and just erase some of them down here. All right, so I like how that's looking. So I'm going to go back to object mode, and let's go back here to the shading workspace. Now I think there's still a bit too many peanuts. So let's actually go here to the geometry node workspace, and then I can turn the density max down. So maybe let's just turn it down to like a 5,000. And on this distance minimum value, I could turn this up just a little bit to maybe like a 0.015. So there's a little bit less peanuts. Just kind of play around with this value until you get it how you like. So the next thing that I want to do is add some tiny little chunks of light colored salt. So we're going to go back here to the layout, and we first need to make the salt objects. So I'll hold down the Z button, go back to solid view. Let's move up here, and we're going to take the chopped peanuts object, and we're going to use that to make the salt. So I'll just box select all of the peanuts, and we'll hit Shift D to duplicate and bring it up, and then I'll hit M, and we're going to move it into a new collection, and I can just call it salt and click on create. And I'm going to scale everything down by 0.4, and then press Ctrl A and apply the scale, and I can bring it down a little bit. And also we don't need to see the peanuts anymore, so here in the outliner I can click on this just to hide the peanuts collection. So now let's zoom into the salt, and I'll select one of these salt pieces. Let's go here to the materials, and we're going to click on the X to delete the material. Let's add a new material, and I can call this material salt. And then I'll hit Ctrl L, and we're going to link the materials. So let's now go over here to the shading workspace, and let's just zoom into the salt chunks. So for this material, I'm going to make the base color fully white, and then I'll turn the roughness down to like a 0.3. And then I'm going to turn on the transmission here, and I'm going to turn the transmission weight to a 0.85. So now it looks like little chunks of sea salt, and it is slightly transparent. So we don't need to really see the salt chunks anymore. So here in the outliner, we can just hide the salt chunks collection, and we can now go here to the geometry nodes workspace, and we'll select the main object. We're now going to click on add modifier, and we're going to add new geometry nodes, and then if we click on the drop down, we're going to add the same peanuts geometry nodes. But then we'll click on this button here, which looks like two little pieces of paper. That's going to duplicate it, so it is a separate geometry node setup, but it still is using the same setup and the settings. So let's now click on this to rename it, and I can rename it to salt. Let's also rename this to salt, and then here on the geometry nodes, I'll rename this to peanuts just so it's nicely organized. Now I want the salt geometry node setup to be here on top of the peanuts one, because if it's on the bottom, the chunks of salt are going to be kind of on top of the peanuts, and I don't really want that. So I'm going to drag it up here so it's at the very top. So now just make sure you're previewing the salt. Let's just make this smaller, and I'll go into the rendered viewport mode. And now what I want to do is just change the geometry node setup. So we'll delete the peanuts, and we're going to add the salt collection instead in the collection info. And now if I zoom in closely, you can see there's these little chunks of salt. And then I also want to make them much smaller because they're definitely too big. So on the maximum, on the random value, I'll go with a 0.13, and on the minimum, I'll go with a 0.05. Let's go up here to the distribute points on faces. And on the density max, I'll turn this to like an 8,000 so there's more of them. And then let's also turn down the distance minimum value so there's a few more of them. So maybe like a 0.06, something like that, so there's a bit more of those salt chunks. So now I want to do pretty much the same exact thing, so we're going to use the same setup, but we're going to add sprinkles instead. So let's go here to the layout, I'll zoom out here, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add an icosphere. And if I click right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I'm going to turn the subdivisions way down to like a 3, and then I'll shade the object smooth. Then I'm going to scale the sprinkles down by a 0.01. Just a 0.01 will bring it up here so we can see it. And I'll press Ctrl A and apply the object scale. Let's now move it over, and then we'll duplicate 2 of them right here, and then select them and duplicate them again. So we have 6 of them. And then we'll select all of them, and we'll hit M. We'll move it into a new collection, and we'll call this sprinkles and click on create. So now we can add a material to the sprinkles, so we'll go to the shading workspace. Let's zoom into the sprinkles and go into the rendered view. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I'll rename the material to sprinkles. And then let's hit Ctrl L, and we can link the materials so they all have the same material. So with the sprinkles, I want to have them randomly have different colors. So if I go to the add menu, I can search for the object info, and we're going to take the random value and we're going to put that into the base color. This way, if I preview the random value, you can see each one of the sprinkles is randomly going to have colors generated between white and black. So I'll just preview the principled shader again. So now to make the random colors, I can search for a color ramp. And I'll put the color up here in between the object info and the principled shader. And now what I can do is make all the random colors here by holding down the control key and adding tabs here. So I'm going to hold down the control key and add a lot of tabs here. Also on the linear type right here, I'm going to change it to constant, and that way there isn't any blending within the colors. So now let's make all the colors. So for the first color here, I'm going to go with a very light blue, kind of like an aqua blue or kind of a teal color. And then for this next one here, let's make this one like a really dark blue. Then for the next one, we're going to do like a bright green. And then for this next one here, we're going to go with like a pink color. And then we're also going to do like an orangey color. And let's also do a yellow color. And I also want to hold down the control key, click here to add another one. And this one, we're going to make like a red color. Then we're also going to do white. And then we'll add one more by holding down the control key and clicking there to add another one. And this one is going to be like a purple one. And then what I'll do is hold down the control key and click here just to add one more right there. And then what I'm going to do is click on the drop down, and I can click on distribute stops evenly. So now you can see they're all evenly placed, but why I added that other one is because this purple one is over here at the very end. So if I didn't add that extra one, this purple one would be over there and you wouldn't be able to see it. Let's also turn the roughness down to a 0.2 so they're more shiny. So now I don't need to see the sprinkles anymore, so I can hide them there in the outliner. Let's go back to the geometry nodes. And let's select the main object again, and I want to do pretty much the same exact thing. So we're going to click on add modifier, we're going to add new geometry nodes, and then what we're going to do is click on the drop down and we're going to add the salt. But then what we're going to do is drag this right up here, drag it up here. So here on the one in the middle, let's click on this button here to duplicate it, and I'll rename it to sprinkles. So now we want to click on the X here just to get rid of the salt chunks, and we're instead going to choose the sprinkles collection. Now you can see that the sprinkles are at the same exact position as the salt. That's because we need to turn the seed value to a different seed, and now they're placed randomly. So now we can change some of the settings of the sprinkles. So one thing that I want to do is have the minimum and maximum values the same value. So I'm going to go with a minimum and maximum of 0.25. I think 0.25 is pretty good. And then what I also want to do is use the same density factor from what we weight painted. So if I open up the side panel, we'll click on the input attribute toggle to choose that on the sprinkles. And then we're going to choose the peanuts. So now you can see they're placed where we weight painted, so that looks a bit better. You can also change the amount here, and you can also change the distance min, so maybe I'll turn the distance min down a little bit so there's a few more of them, and then also I can turn the density max up a little bit. So let's click back here to go back to the layout, and we are almost ready to render the scene and then do the compositing. So what we're going to do is select the chocolate sauce and select the ice cream. We're also going to select the two little dribbles here, and then lastly we're going to shift select the cone, and I'll press Ctrl P, and we're going to set parent to object, keep transform. So this way, if I move this object around, the other objects are going to move with it. So what I want to do is kind of rotate this over like that and just make it kind of rotate over to the side, something like that. And then if I hold down the shift key and select all of the objects again, I can hit shift D to duplicate, and let's rotate it. And let's bring it back a little bit just so it's slightly behind and have it kind of rotating over. Let's go to top view and just make sure they're not overlapping like that. And we'll just have one more kind of behind this one. So we'll rotate this one over, and this one, I'll rotate it along the Z-axis, the local Z-axis, kind of rotate over like that so it's at a different spot. Now you can of course customize these however you like, but what I thought was kind of cool is maybe to have the back one not have the sprinkles. So if I click here to go to the modifiers tab, I can click on the monitor icon on the sprinkles and also the camera icon. That way it's going to hide it from the view. So now we have one with sprinkles and one without sprinkles. Another cool thing you could do is maybe change the color of the ice cream. So you could duplicate this material and change the color of the ice cream. You could also change the color of the chocolate sauce or do whatever you want just to make it look different and unique. So now I want to add a small depth of field. So I'll go to the add menu, I'll go here to empty, and I'll just add an empty sphere. And I'm going to use an empty sphere object as the focus object because empties don't show up in the final render because they don't have any visible faces. So I'm going to scale the empty way down so it's pretty small. And I'm just going to bring it up here, and I'm just going to stick it right on the very top surface of the ice cream. And then if we select the camera, we can click here to go to the object data properties, and we'll turn on the depth of field. And then if we click on the eyedropper, we can choose the empty. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode to see how this is looking. So what I first like to do is to turn the f-stop value to a really small value so it's too strong. And then I can just click on the arrow to make it stronger and stronger. So I'm going to go with an f-stop value of about 3. I think 3 is pretty good. So it's in focus focus here, but then the back one is just a bit blurred. Go to the render settings. So we'll go here to the render properties and let's open up the sampling. And on the render samples, I'm going to turn on the denoise so it denoises the image, and I'll turn the samples to like a 200. So I'll hit Control S to save, and then we'll click on render and we will render the final image, or hit F12. All right, so the render is finished. So let's go to the Compositing tab. We'll click on Use Nodes, and then because we turned on the Node Wrangler, I'll Control-Shift select the render layers to add the viewer, and I'll hit the V key to zoom out the backdrop. So let's now add the background. So I'm going to drag the render layers back, and I'm going to search for an alpha over node. We'll drop this here, and we'll put the image into the viewer and the composite. So I'm now going to be going to the add menu, and let's search for an image. We'll drop the image right here, and then I'll click on the open button. And here's the gradient image that I downloaded from Pixabay. So again, link is in the description if you didn't download it. And let's click on open image. And now the gradient image can go here into the top image. And then we're going to have the render layers go into the bottom image. I'm also going to click on that little eye there just to hide that preview. Let's just drag this down and make it a little bit bigger. So now you can see we have that nice gradient in the background, but it's way too big because it's larger than the render image. So what I need to do is search for the scale. So we're going to drop the scale right here, and then instead of relative, we're going to change it to a render size. So now you can see it basically cropped it so it's the correct size for the image. And then what I want to do, you can see it's a little bit darker down here on the bottom. So what I want to do is rotate it so the darker part is at the top to add a bit more contrast. So I'm going to search for the transform node, and we'll drop it here before the scale, and I'm going to change the angle to 180. So now you can see that it's at the very top. It's more red there at the very top. So now I just want to do a bit of color correction. So I'm going to search for a hue saturation value. We'll put this after the scale, and I'm going to turn the value down to a 0.45 so it just looks a little bit darker. Then I want to search for the RGB curves, and we'll put the RGB curves after the hue saturation value. And I'll click here on the R for red, and I'm going to drag this up a little bit just so that the red is a bit more saturated. And then I'll click on the G for green, and I'll drag this down. There's a little bit less green, so it looks almost like a more pink red. So then what I want to do is add a red vignette just to add a little bit more red around the entire image. So I'll duplicate the alpha over node. Let's drag the viewer and composite back, and I'm going to drop the new alpha over node right here and put the image both up to the viewer and the composite. So what I'm now going to do is search for a box mask, and I'll drop this up here. Let's drag it out so it's bigger. And if I click on the box mask, there's going to be a viewport display of where the box mask is. So I can drag the width out, make the width a lot bigger. And then if I hit Control C to copy the width value, I'll hit Control V to paste it there into the height. So now we just have that box there. Now what I want to do is blur it. So we're going to search for the blur node and drop this here. And the mask can go into the image. Then we're going to take the blur image, and we're going to put this into the factor. And then the alpha over here, that can go into the bottom image. So now the top image is going to be the color of the vignette. First, let's just make it really blurry. So here on the X and Y values of the blur, I'm going to set this to 500, and it might take a little while to composite because it does take a while to blur it. So there we go. Now you can see there's this white blur. So now what I want to do is basically make it the same exact color as the background. So if I click on the white color and then click on the eyedropper, I can click right here in the corner to choose that nice saturated red color. But then what I'll do is maybe make it a little bit more saturated and make it a little bit darker. And here's the hex value if you want to use the same exact color that I'm going to use. So now we have that nice red color around the image. So let's hit the F11 key. The F11 key is going to go to the render result, but if we click right here, we can choose the viewer node. And there's the final image. So to save this, you can click on image and click on save as. And I'll just save this as Ice Cream Drumstick in the folder with my project files, and I'll save the image. And so that's going to wrap up this tutorial on how to create this ice cream drumstick in Blender. So thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to purchase the finished tutorial project files and help support the channel, you can get that with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page and the Blender Market. And if you like using procedural materials in your projects like we did in this tutorial, then you might be interested in checking out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you've set up my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library into Blender, you can just drag and drop the procedural materials into your 3D project. Drumsticks. You can also check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist to learn how to create more procedural materials. And if you'd like to learn how to create more food renders in Blender, you can check out my Blender food tutorial playlist, where I have some more food tutorials, like a sushi tutorial, a pizza tutorial, and some more food Blender tutorials. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.